example. I'm sure if you go back and talk to Shirley or my son or my other son or whatever, they'll tell you correctly, I make mistakes. I'm not perfect. But fortunately, as you go through your life and the years start to pile up, you start realizing the mistakes you made and you do your best to correct them. Now I want to go back to Mosiah, if I may, chapter 13. I'm going to read 2 verses there. But this time, this is about 140 years maybe before Jesus was born. Okay, so this is a long time ago. But back in this time, they had a difficulty keeping their priorities straight too. For some reason, Israel was called in the scripture as being a real stiff-necked people, quick to forget. They witnessed so many miracles, and I don't know how many of you here can say that you witnessed some of the miracles that Israel did when they were led out of Egypt. Have any of you said any such miracles as that? You ever see a large body of water divide where you could walk across on dry shod and look at the walls of water on both sides? You ever seen that in your life? How much of that would you have to see to say, wow, God can do this? Wouldn't that make an impression on your mind that you would never forget? I would hope so. Or all the plagues that were put upon the Egyptians because they just had God's people in a bad way and wouldn't let them go. And they suffered, even to the time whenever the death angel came and took the life of all the babies. Wouldn't that be horrible to see? Things that would have happened that you would have made a lifelong impression, that you would never forget where you should be and who is the most important in your life. But yet Israel was still so stiff-necked, so hard-headed that they would quickly forget. What says in verse 29 and 30 of the 13th chapter, it says, "And now I say unto you that it was expedient that there should be a law given unto the children of Israel." So it was necessary. This just had to happen to try to get them straight. Yea, even a very strict law, for they were a stiff-necked people, quick to do iniquity and slow to remember their God. We have to be careful, brothers and sisters. That never happens to us. We don't want to get so wrapped up in our life and all those things that are more important than God that we actually just forget God and forget all the good things He did. One of the nicest parts about our meeting or testimony time, isn't it? When you can hear all the blessings that God has done for His people. That's probably one of our favorite meetings because we hear the praise reports, the miracles, and the times that God has come and rescued us from our time of need. And it goes on to say, "Therefore there was a law given them, yea, a law of performances and of ordinances, a law which they were to observe strictly from day to day, to keep them in remembrance of God and their duty towards Him." They had to pass a law to make it necessary for you to remember your duty. Now, does it take that for you and I this morning? Is it going to take such an extreme measure for us to remember what our duty to God is? Well, I guess first we need to find out, what is our duty? What do we mean by that? Well, when I was thinking about this subject and reading a little, I thought, let's look at Jesus, okay? Along comes this new baby boy, born just like any other baby, flesh and blood. He didn't come sweeping down out of heaven like on a chariot and say, "Here I am." He was born like you and I, just a flesh and blood baby. But the only difference is that a young man, a young teenager, he started developing that realization that I'm here for a purpose. Remember that when he was in the temple when his parents left and forgot him? And they come back, "Where'd you been, Jesus?" He said, "I was about doing my Father's work." He realized that like a 12-year-old boy, he had a duty to perform. And then we read about his life. Unfortunately, there's only a few short years to read on his life. But he, as the age of 30, entered the age of a priest, established his church, put in all the wonderful things that we enjoy today called our ordinances. It was his duty. He was sent here for a purpose. He wasn't sent here to play football. He wasn't sent here to be the best farmer, grow the biggest ears of corn. I tell you, you want to see big ears of corn, go to Guatemala. I had, on my first trip to Guatemala, everywhere we went, they brought this huge ears of corn. They were good, weren't they? But they have a different kind of stuff they put on it. I like salt and butter on my corn. I don't know how you on your corn on the cob, but the second trip I went to Guatemala, I was a step ahead. I got that spray butter, and I took them little disposable salt shakers and put it in my backpack. Well, I get to Guatemala, guess what? It was out of season. There was no corn. But Jesus recognized his duty that he owed to the Father. And it breaks my heart when I read that scripture where he's in the garden praying. And he said, Lord, if this cup can pass from me. He recognized what his duty was. He knew it was going to be a painful, sorrowful way to have to go. But yet he said, Lord, your will be done. And he went on, allowed man to put him on that cross, gave his life as a sacrifice for your and my sins. He accepted his duty. That was what he was sent here for. That he would be an ultimate sacrifice, that mankind can find their way back to God. Without that sacrifice, we would still have no hope. Now, I'm not thinking this morning that each of us will have to go to that extent to satisfy God. I certainly hope and pray not. But you know, we need to find that duty. I don't care if it's teaching a Sunday school class. I was talking with Chris a little bit this morning, chairman of the trustees in our branch, and I said, that's an absolute, I hate that job. It's the most unappreciated job that I could ever think of. But you know what? Someone's got to do it. And I've been brought up in the church and taught that when they need somebody, you know how it is when this comes. I remember in Sunday school class when I was a teenager, you know, they start to ask questions. You slide down in your chair so they couldn't see you. I was taught in the church when there's a need and you can do it, you accept it and do it to the best you can. Find your place. Do your job. Well, the Lord has blessed me in a lot of ways. Talents. I've pretty much done most things except for lay laminate floors. And I found out yesterday I don't want to ever do that. But you take the talents that God has given you and you use it to his honor and glory. That is your duty, and it's not an unreasonable duty. If it's teaching a class, now I have a PhD degree, plain high school diploma. A lot of those, and I admire them, they go to school and they're fantastic teachers. We have several in our branch, I'm sure that you do in your branch. They know how to present subjects and how to ask questions and dig answers out of people. Whatever the gifts that God gives you, you use them. That is your duty because he gave it to you. We need to find our place. We were talking this morning in Sunday school, someone mentioned about television and the good side and the bad side of TV. I remember, I think it was my second trip to India. It was a 28-day trip. It was almost a month in India. Never saw TV. The hotel rooms we stayed at made Motel 6 look like a 5-star resort on the beach. I mean, to say that they were a dump would be a compliment to the hotel. There was no TVs in these rooms. Okay. One time, Brother Dino and I were in one room, and Brother John and Brother Harold Littlejohn were in the next room. And Dino dropped his suitcase on his bed, and cockroaches came out from underneath his pillow. And he was so disgusted, he called John on the phone. Jonathan, and John said, I don't know why you're complaining. We don't even have a toilet seat in our toilet. I kid you not. But you find your place. Now, everybody can't go to some other. I've made a lot of trips to Africa and India. I can deal with it. Some people can't. They see a bug, they want to collapse. I was in Nigeria one time. There was a black cobra in our living room in that little mission house. Well, you just kill the snake and throw it out. You go on. I mean, it's not the end of life. Snakes don't destroy you, okay? But some people can't tolerate that. But not, everybody doesn't have to go to Africa. Everybody doesn't have to go to India. There's a place for all of us. But we need to find our duty. And if we do that, the church progresses. The church grows. There's lots of opportunities in the church. And it's changed so much from the time I was baptized in 1967. And church has changed an awful lot since then. They've become more electronic. Yeah, I hate that. I'm not an electronic person, but much more global and a lot more active in missionary work all over the world. Africa was in process, but I think that was Nigeria was in. They started what, 64 or 54? In the 50s, right? And that was the only foreign mission field that was in operation then, was Africa. But now look, they're all over the place. So it takes the talents of every one of us. So our question that we need to ask ourselves is, what is my duty to God? What do I need to do? What do I need to find that I can make my contribution? You see, we have to go and do what the Lord puts in our heart for us. I can't save your soul. If I could save anybody, believe me, I would do my best to keep my boys, my granddaughters, my grandsons, my daughters-in-law. I'd make sure they had that place right there. Remember the guy, remember in the New Testament where the mother wanted Jesus to promise he would keep the seat at his right side in heaven for her son? You remember that? Wouldn't I do that for my family? I'd want them all sitting in a row, first row. We can't. They have to work their own. They have to earn that spot for themselves. So we encourage them the best we can to find your duty to God. Find what it is. Don't give up, no matter how challenging, no matter how difficult the task. And as we do that, the Lord will bless us and guide us. So may God bless you today as we strive to find our duty to serve our God the best we can.
Sermon number 66 in the branch room favorites. Number 66.
precious Lord, I love thee more than all of these. More than fame, more than wealth, more than the world. I love thee more than this whole world can offer. All sinful follies I deny for thee. My love, my life, my all, I pledge thee. I love thee, Lord, lovest thou me more than these? Lovest thou me more than these, my child? What will your answer be? Oh, precious Lord, I love thee more than all of these. More than fame, more than wealth, more
Well, I enjoyed my brother's words this morning, as I'm sure you did also, and causes you to consider yourself in this world, in this kingdom, in the Church of Jesus Christ, and what that duty is. And we're going to begin to prepare to go into the Lord's Supper now, and I guess I've heard Brother Malcolm speak a lot, just because he visits here because of family, and we go to Forest Hills sometimes when we visit Florida, and just family. So we just kind of and I know he often shares this story about when he was you were drafted into the military, correct? Right, into the Air Force.
I was drafted and I enlisted, so I didn't have to get dirty.
Okay, right. So, which kind of, right? So I'm looking at Brother Peter and Brother Malcolm, and Brother Pete isn't here right now, but these are veterans of, we'll say, the Vietnam era, and so I know Brother Peter was drafted, and I'm sure the first thing in his mind was probably, I'm going to Vietnam, and and I know that's not what he wanted to do, but for somebody that was their duty, right? If Brother Pete were here, he'd say, yeah, that was his duty, and he went to Vietnam, but and I'm sure if that was to be his duty, he would have gone. Fortunately, the Lord opened the door for him in Berlin, and didn't have to serve in a combat zone, but some people did. That was their duty. Some people volunteered for it. A lot of people didn't, but it was still their duty. And so, so Brother Malcolm always shares this story where, so you enlisted in the Air Force, but he got to do his basic training with the Marines. All right? He got dirty. He joined the Air Force because he didn't want to get dirty. Well, he got dirty because, it was, I guess there were resources and said, here, you get to train with the Marines. And he's not what I signed up for, right? But it was his duty at that time got a little rougher than maybe he expected. But that was his duty, and he did it. And, when we think about Jesus and his duty, and our brother spoke about it a little bit, and, he mentioned when Jesus was 12 years old, and it was, it was that at that age, where he started to be about his Father's business, right? And you think, okay, on what scale? On the scale of being in the temple and conversing with the experts in the law, right? That's, you might think, well, at 12, what can he do? Well, maybe he can, you think about if you're working on a project with your father, you're 12 years old. What are you doing? you're probably holding the light, right? Or holding something open so that he can get in there and really do the dirty work. Here, 12 years old, he's already about his Father's business to a high level. And then I think, then we really don't hear anything for the next 18 years, right? Those hidden years of Jesus' life. We don't really know. I mean, we know he worked as a carpenter, so sometime between, and he probably learned it at a very young age, but, he must have gone to work as a carpenter. And his duty was to work by his Father's side, while obviously his Father in heaven continuing to develop in him that ministry that he took on at 30 years old. And in 3 short years, his duty was to go to the cross. A duty that was bound for each of us. But he said, well, I'll make that my duty, to go to the cross so that you don't have to. And when it's duty, it's usually not something that, you're like usually excited about. The Lord knew that by him doing his duty, it brought salvation to his creation whom he loved so dearly. But it was still a duty, and it was still a challenge. And it was so much a challenge that he asked his Father, he says, can you make this go away? Can you find some other way? And he knew it. He knew that if there was another way, his Father would have already told him. He said, no, this is the only way. This is the only way it can happen, is if you do your duty and you go to the cross. That's what we realize as we partake of this table. We realize that that's a duty that was ours, but he did it. And so when we consider, when we juxtapose our duty to the duty that the Lord took for us, it's kind of small. But wherever that leads us, Africa, Guatemala, India, right? Yes, we don't all have to contend with your brother Ryan and I laughed. He says, because Brother Malcolm said, a snake isn't the end of life. Well, a black cobra could be the end of life. But when we talk about life, it's not about this life. I don't think he was thinking about this life. I think what he was referring to is that eternal life that awaits us because Jesus went and did his duty. So as we focus on that, now I'm going to ask Brother Chris if he would take charge of the table. Let's turn to number 36 in the Branch One Favorites. Had it not been